change nothing. Make it more fair. Like, what are you talking about? Change nothing. Hey Ninjababes, what's up? I'm Cara Mack, and I'm here with Mary Layton. Greetings.
Hello.
We're back.
We're back.
Yeah, do you recognize our faces from the Females in Ninja seminar that we gave during the NNL? Yeah, so we're here. I'm just going to dive right into what our topic is about. We're here to go over feedback. So many people have said, like, what have you been hearing from other people? Like, I'm going to give you my opinion, but what's everybody else saying? Like, so many people have been really curious about all of the feedback and the perspectives that we've been hearing after giving the seminar 6 times during the National Ninja League World Finals. And for those of you who are like, what are we talking about? About 2 years ago, Mary Layton and I started really diving into the topic and the concept of, you know, why do we compete on one course, males and females, and would there be a benefit to splitting? Would it be horrible to split and have 2 separate courses? What are all the implications of that? What do other sports do? How would other sports view this question? And so we did a lot of interviews with professionals from outside of Ninja, professionals in sports performance, people who have PhDs in kinesiology and all these things, and top Ninja coaches who've been in Ninja for a long time. And all of this really culminated to just a few weeks ago at the National Ninja League World Finals. World Championships.
I was going to say, we got the World Championships.
National Ninja League World Championships, where Mary and I were able to give a presentation. We were so honored and excited to be there to be able to present on all of the research and the findings that we've been doing, and really just proposing some questions to the community at large, just to really dig deep into this topic and think about everything we know, like we've been researching and looking into, but then proposing it to the community, like, hey, is there a different way to build courses? Is there a different way that we can set up courses for males and females? Or if we're staying on the same course, why don't we consider having an extra time limit for women? Like, all these different questions. And Mary, you can speak for yourself, but I think that our approach was like, hey, we want to just put it all out there. Yeah. We have our own thoughts, sure, but like, we really want to know what everyone else thinks, and we really want to present all of the information in a way that's honest, like, questioning, but also like, come on, like, tell us what you think. And we definitely got a lot of feedback.
Yeah, we got a ton of feedback. And so if you weren't able to make the seminar in person, it is up on YouTube if you kind of want to just watch it and see like, where is all this feedback coming from? Like, what questions did we ask that generated this feedback? I think the coolest thing for me in being involved in this was just hearing and seeing so many people wanting to be involved in part of the discussion. You know, it's not just like 2 people who are like, hey, like, let's make this more fair for our female athletes. It was like, the whole community was like, yeah, this is a question we need to answer. And obviously there's a lot of different answers, and that's what we're going to get into today. But yeah, that was really cool to see. So
yeah, because I know that there's some of you screaming in your seats right now being like, change nothing, make it more fair. Like, what are you talking about? Change nothing. And so we want to kind of get into all those perspectives. So so we're just going to dive right in and go through the list. All right. I also, I had linked to that presentation if you want to go back and watch. If you're on YouTube, you can easily see the link and click it. If you're listening on audio, you're going to have to scroll down and find the link in the description. So anyways, moving on.
I want to like point to where it is on my screen, but I don't know where
It was going to be up there.
There.
But it's kind of disappeared by this point, but I guess I can put it back. All right, so I'm just going to jump into number 1 on our little list here. Mary knows what I'm talking about. One of the biggest reactions, I would say, is that, yeah, but if you change to separate courses, it's just going to make the girls' course look easier, or it's just going to make it look like we need an easier course for the women. That's kind of like the blanket statement reaction that we got.
I think on that, one of the we were given like a really strong example of from a competition that one of the athletes had been to, and there was a warped wall obstacle, and the men were given 14 and a half, no run up, and then the women were given the 12-foot with a significant run up. And so like that sort of adjustment, like, okay, yeah, it's easier than the 14 with no run up, like that would have been difficult, but like to do the 12-foot with the run up, you know, most athletes are pretty competent at getting up the 12-foot warped wall. So it was like a very obvious, like, oh, we need to make this easier for you. And so I think that's a perfect example of like the sort of adjustment we don't want, like going too far in that other direction. And when I say we, I mean the general opinion of we. We're just kind of giving you guys like the feedback that we got here. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of questions from course designers and other coaches especially being like, well, if we're not just trying to make it quote unquote easier, how do we accomplish a different course without just being like, oh, here's an obstacle and here's the simpler version or here's the shorter distance or whatever. And I think kind of like the step further from this whole concept of we don't want to just make the women look weaker is when we look at other sports, there's been kind of like that complaint or like the struggle of women's soccer, different sports where it seems like the women's side of the sport doesn't get as much coverage or notoriety or awards or, winnings and all these things. And like, I would have to really go through every single sport to know exactly what all of those differences are in every sport. Yeah. But we don't want Ninja to turn into something where the women are just not valued as much or not, looked to as much. And so I think that's some people's opinion is that if you make a change like that, it's just leading down that road of the women are just like over there.
It's, I think the statistic, I remember actually in our original episode, we went over the statistic of just the coverage of male sports compared to female sports. I want to say it's like it's under 10%, just a ridiculously low number. And I actually had another person talk to me about UNX. They kind of brought up UNX as an example of this. They were like, yeah, it was great. Like Flex Lebret cleared the course, Maggie Owen cleared the course. But if you asked anyone like who won UNX, they were able to tell you who won on the men's side, but on the female side, like they had no idea. And so it's kind of like that's already happened where we've experimented with having separate courses and like a separate episode, so to speak, covering the female side, and not as many people watched it. So it's kind of like, okay, so that's what they're talking about. Like that's the concern.
I guess my question to that would be if in our mixed, like co-ed on one course, do we still, as it is right now, do we feel like the general public is paying as much attention to the women as they are the men just because they are in the same course? Like if strangers listening right now, like who were at Worlds or who watched Worlds, like could you still tell me who the top 3 women were? Yeah. Or who were the top 3 men? Like, I don't know. I guess I get what those arguments are saying, but I'm still wondering like keeping us on the same course, does that solve the problem? As far as like that question?
It's a good question.
It's a good question. Okay. A good example that was brought up in the seminars over and over, so not like our example necessarily, but other people said this, was the example of rock climbing in the Olympics. Basically, in the Olympics in rock climbing, we're going to see or have seen that there are different routes for men and women, but the routes are not just like, oh, here the holds are closer together for the females. It's like completely different problems that tackle different skills and really test different types of skill sets on the climbing problems. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I think the most important point about it to say like it's tackling different skill sets is that if you're from the outside looking in, right, like speaking to the point of we don't want an easier course, right? Or we don't want the course to just look easier and people to become disinterested. What rock climbing has really accomplished is like when you look at the men's problems and you look at the women's problems, like they're hard, period. Like it's not like, oh, the women's is a little bit easier because they don't have as enormous of a wingspan. It's just they're both hard and they're both interesting to watch. And I think that if that's something that we were able to accomplish in separate courses in Ninja, that's where we might see more people being open to that idea.
Right. Yeah. Because I think what wouldn't make sense is creating a men's course, which is the ideal, the standard, and then just like figuring out a women's course like as an afterthought. Or this came up as well, was that some gyms in the NNL for past seasons really have started with, okay, I'm going to build an elite course, or I'm going to build an adults course, and then I'm going to just like water down or make easier the young adults, the preteen, like all of it, like working downwards from that. And I personally have not had as much course design experience as I know you have, Mary. And so hearing people's opinion in the presentation was kind of like, that's the wrong way to do it. Just kind of like watering it down backwards because you're not really considering the strength or the level of the athlete that you're looking at. You're just kind of making it, you're just backtracking and making it easier. It's not the most effective way to build a course.
Right. Yeah, I would say to that is how we tend to do things at Ultimate. But I think with that, there's just a very like strong consideration of like what is the field capable of, right? And I think that you can't just like build the elite course and then be like, okay, so now we're going to make this a 6-foot lâché instead of an 8-foot lâché. Now we're going to change the holds from the big cannonballs to the little cannonballs with more grip. Like that's not really the right way to do it. You can look at the obstacles and be like, okay, so, you know, is the adult male field and the adult female field able to do this obstacle here? If they can, then you don't really change it from the elite, right? But if you get to a point where, like, say it's the length of the course and you know the relative endurance of the adult field is less than that of the elite field, that's where you kind of make those changes. It can work, but it can't work unless you're really considering the athletes that you're dealing with and like what are they fully capable of. And sometimes you don't know, right? Like sometimes people completely surprise you. I know at regionals we were looking at our adult course and one of our team members was like, I don't think anyone's clearing this course. And I was like, I think we'll get 2 clears. We ended up with 1 clear, right? So it is kind of hit or miss sometimes because competition does weird things to people sometimes. Like, you could say, like, okay, if this was, like, practice, like, yeah, we'd have 6 clears. But, like, competition always adds that pressure, so.
For sure. And I would love to hear more course designers' opinion about their approach to building courses that have to cater to several divisions. I'd just be really curious to hear people's comments. So comment.
Let us know.
Let us know. Moving on. So one of the other questions that came up a lot was if we are building a course that is co-ed and we want to keep it co-ed, is there a way that we could add in more choices on the course? So in reference to if you're at the National Ninja League World Championships, either this year or in past years, or maybe they didn't have it in past years, I'm not sure, but on the skills competition this year for sure, they had, names.
Full swing.
Full swing. I wanted to say big throw. I don't know why. Super lame.
It's a great name.
Super
big
lame.
Throw. And first place in big throw goes to
Full swing. Okay. So in full swing, there was a point where...
I'm just going to call it big throw from now on. All right, kids, we're training for big throw today. What?
Can you do the big throw?
Can you?
So you started on a circular ledge. Don't know if there's a more proper name for that, but you could either basically do a larger throw going forward. I believe it was 8 feet.
8 feet.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I guess speaking of the adults division, or I don't know if it was 8 feet.
I think it was the same for the kids.
It just stayed at 8 feet. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could either have done a large throw forward 8 feet and then again forward 8 feet, or you could have veered to the right from your first throw to a kind of like a T-ledge cliffhanger, like chunky situation, which was half the distance, so like a 4 foot, and then you would have gone left again, like kind of zigzagged. And so basically, like the point is that they had created an obstacle which essentially had 2 routes. You could do one route that was like harder and bigger throws, but faster. If you could accomplish it that way. I mean, not necessarily faster if you took a million swings, but you had 2 choices of how you wanted to approach it. One could save you a lot of time, but it was arguably more difficult. The other one was more moves, still had quite a lot of challenge to it. You still had to nail all those landings and know how to throw appropriately. But the question is, could we have more choices like that worked into courses that would allow all of us to compete on the same course, but for any athlete, female or not, who feels that a specific move is not doable for them and they want to take a different route, it would require more moves. It would probably make them slower on the course, but they could still accomplish it in a different way. So, and that's not just to be like, oh, every obstacle needs a second option because they're all too hard. Like, that's not the point. But kind of like some of these obstacles that, you know, Mary was mentioning earlier that are kind of like that crux point for the females, or even for really short athletes, or just athletes that like this certain type of obstacle doesn't really seem fair to have on a course for everyone. Could there be a second option that would be something that would still be challenging and they could kind of like do that route to complete the obstacle and move on? Is there a way to do that?
I think the difficulty that I see in that sort of choice is just that you kind of venture into, are you actually testing the same skill but on a smaller scale, right? Because I watched a couple of my kids do the full swing obstacle or skill, and you know, it's not the same skill set. It really isn't. Like, the flow is completely different. You're hanging onto cliffhangers as opposed to bars. Your body is swinging kind of a completely different direction. So it was still laches, but not really. And so, you know, it didn't really test the same skill either direction you went. And so I think that like, you know, I would be in favor of this option, but it would require a lot of thought and a lot of probably a lot of like space for the gym, right? Because if you're going to compare a lache to lache, you know, that would be, okay, an 8-foot lache, and then we're making it a 6-foot lache, right? And then you kind of get into the complication of like, where does it land in the course, right? Like, if you are able to choose to do the 6-foot laches and this is the 7th obstacle, is that really still like a good progressive 7th obstacle? So I think that would be my critique of this idea. I kind of like it in some ways, but then I do also see like a lot of issues, because then are you saying like only the females can choose the easier option because that's still an appropriate 7th obstacle for them? Or is it, okay, the guys are also allowed to choose this other easier version of it? And then it's like, okay, well, then, you know, there's a whole thing that could happen from that. But that would be my thoughts on this one.
Yeah. And I think also, just to add on to that, I don't think this idea just came about because of split decision on American Ninja Warrior.
Exactly.
I can remember being at, I think it was an NNL comp, like years ago at VertiQuest, and Mike had created 2 different paths for the balance obstacle. It was just 2 different types of balance, and one was like fast and spinny, and one was like slow and controlled, and he allowed for that option. And so I think sometimes, in general, this is like a blanket statement. I know that there's a lot of things that the show does that a lot of us who are trying to drive Ninja forward in like a true sport concept get frustrated with, like, oh, you can't have a choice. I'm not like getting annoyed. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that I don't think this came straight from the show necessarily. Maybe to some people it did, but I think the concept has greater value than maybe just what the show's done with it. But maybe people feel like this is a terrible idea altogether to be part of a sport concept. You know, but we wanted to put it out there. Yeah.
I will say, with the split decision, on the most recent City Finals episode, the comparison of the 2 that they had, tuning forks versus the upper body obstacle, tuning forks is pretty equally hard. Like, that was what I appreciated, was seeing a really difficult agility obstacle side by side with like another very tough like upper body obstacle. So like, that was like, I think it was well executed. If you were going to have 2 completely different skill sets tested, they were kind of like equally hard skill sets. So I will give them props for that.
Tuning fork is scary. Anyways.
Yeah, I love agility obstacles and fast balance and stuff, but I'm just like, I don't know if I would ever choose that. I honestly don't. And I'm like not that great at upper body all the time, so I'm like
yeah, we'll see what happens in my episode next week. Anyways. All right, so the next topic that came up was, so I'll preface it with saying, at National Ninja League, in our presentation, we really pointed out the fact that it's already in the rulebook that you can give additional time. There is like 2 small changes you could do for females. Additional time limit on the course, and then changing the height/distance of a trampoline if you have a tramp jump into something. Yeah. Those 2. So we had highlighted that in our presentation because I honestly didn't know of that rule until Mary had pulled it out of the book and was like, hey, look. And I was like, what?
And I had just found it because I was trying to, it was funny. We had height boxes at regionals, and somebody made a comment. They're like, oh, you can't have height boxes. And I was like, wait, what? And so I was looking at the rule book to see if there was any like specific guidance on it. Because we obviously want it to be, you know, NNL rule, follow the NNL rules.
Appropriate.
For regionals, obviously. And then I found that, and I was like, oh, okay. I had no idea that rule existed. So that was...
Yeah, and every time we asked at every presentation, show of hands, who knows this rule? And sometimes it was none, and sometimes it was like 1 or 2 hands. Yeah. You know, out of our room of like 20, 25 people. Yeah. So...
But they always said, I've never seen it in competition. Like that, like no matter who knew it existed, most of them had never seen it actually executed in a competition.
except for people who were actually like work for NNL, who knew it was a rule, or like knew about it because they were like present for everything.
They're like, we wrote that rule. Yes, it exists. Like,
yeah, I was like, you don't count. Put your hands down. Just kidding. So back to the point.
Yeah.
So we brought this up every day, and then it kind of got circulated around, and NNL board and decision-making people kind of heard that like we were talking about it so much, and a lot of parents or other coaches had kind of said like, hey, yeah, why don't we see this? Why don't we see this? It was quite the buzz, and so they ended up going ahead, and for the elite division on the last day, they did give 20 extra seconds for females on the course. So we were both very curious to see how that was going to play out, because all week long, except for which divisions, there were not female course clears, which kind of did go along with the statistics that we showed from the whole season. So there were course clears in which divisions?
So I want to say that there were course clears in every division except for there was the teen female division, the young adult female division. I don't think there are any course clears. We did see clears in the preteen division.
Yeah.
And I want to say mature kids.
And mature kids.
Too. Yeah.
Which went along with the statistics that we had showed in that graph. Could put it up real fast again if people want to see it. But it kind of went along with those numbers and made sense with what we were seeing in the trend of course clears.
Yeah.
So then when they did the extra 20 seconds, we were very curious to see. And the question was then, should there be extra time just automatically for certain divisions or for females across the board, or like, is there some sort of a rule that would make sense?
Yeah. I think in this case, I think that course, it was completely appropriate to give the additional time. And, you know, what we saw, I'm sure many of you who are listening probably either watched the live stream or you were there for the elite division. You saw the female athletes getting to the same point that most of the male athletes were getting to, which was the very final obstacle and timing out. And there were actually quite a few that were on pace to finish the course. They had plenty of time, and then they just made a mistake on an obstacle, right? So I think that extra time, it definitely made the course more doable for the female athletes. And I think what I was really curious. I asked some of the elite females, I was like, what's your thought? Did you like this? Did you not? And there was actually a lot of positive feedback regarding that change, which I was honestly a little surprised by, but not upset that it happened, you know? So that was definitely really cool to see there. So.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about the elite division in a bit. I do think it depends who you spoke to about.
Yeah, who you talked to.
Because I spoke to a number of elite female athletes as well, and some of them were like, yeah, it was fine, it was cool, whatever. Yeah, okay. And then some of them were like, why did they do that?
Yeah.
It messed up my plan, or like I was planning for the course to be the same as the guys, and that's how I wanted to execute it. So, you know, there were definitely differences of opinion, so I don't want to make too many blanket statements, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second.
Yeah. I would say
anything else?
Yeah, one more thing on this point. I think that if we are looking at different time limits, it also depends on the course and if it makes sense on the course. Like if you have a speed course and it's, you know, your time limit is 1:30 and that's, you know, totally doable, then maybe you don't need to do separate time limits, right? But again, it kind of comes down to like, what are the obstacles and like how successful it's that obstacle mix, like what skills are you testing? So that's something to consider. Yeah,
and with that, it kind of brings some thoughts to mind. So some of the feedback that we got when we put a lot of this information out there, and even we're hearing from like chat groups and things like that, was that is the point of the course to clear it? Is that the point? Because I know, kind of going back again to why did we all start Ninja, I think especially for some of us who are like, I'm going to say like 28 and older, like late 20s and older, I feel like we came into Ninja because it was empowering, it was fitness, it was fun, it made us feel awesome. And so even if you didn't complete a course, you were still experiencing that some sense of accomplishment, some sense of like personal growth and all these things. And so kind of fast forward, at least in my perspective, I feel like now a lot of these athletes who have started as kids or who started, you know, as younger teens or whatever, now their mentality is they want to clear a course because they've grown up looking at it from a different perspective. They're not just looking at it for personal growth. They're looking at it for like, this is my sport. I want to win. And tackling it much more aggressively than I feel like some of us in the past have tackled these courses. And so with that, I think there was this question of like some ninjas feeling like, well, is the point to clear the course? No, the point is to like do your best and see how far you get and like defeat the course together as a community. Some of us will clear the course, some of us won't. That's fine. This is the community approach. But then there's the other kind of field of thinking that's like, well, no, I want to clear a course. Like, this is my sport. I want to see Ninja grow. What if in the future I could get a Ninja scholarship? I don't know. Like, what if Ninja really does continue to grow and just getting to a certain obstacle is not enough? And so I think that's the question is like, are you looking at the course because you want to clear it? Are you building this course intending people to clear it? I think that's also another old school thinking is like, let's make the courses super hard and people aren't going to finish it. Like they're trying to like let the course defeat you kind of a thing.
Right.
So I don't know. There's a lot there.
I think you inspired me to make Ninja a collegiate sport. So
yes.
Another life goal of mine now. I've always wanted to be a college professor.
Okay.
But like in business management. And I feel like my side gig is like an adjunct faculty could be to make Ninja a collegiate sport. So
there you go.
Life goal.
So many life goals come from Ninja. All right. So the next question that came up in the seminar, which became a big topic of discussion, was, could we regulate Ninja in some way that would be helpful? So let me preface this. Kind of comes from two things. So in Ninja right now, as many of you know, you go to a Ninja gym, so-and-so's warp wall might be really steep, might be like a very certain way. You go to a different gym and it feels much easier. Oh, the slope or the warp is more gradual. It feels so much more easier. Or even like the type of grip on like whatever their paint surface is, all these different factors and like qualities of the obstacle itself can vary gym to gym, which can make training on that obstacle feel very, excuse me, I feel like I was going to burp and then nothing happened.
And sneeze.
Okay,
God bless you and excuse you. There you go.
All right, it's just like talking so much and not breathing. I feel like that's so funny. Okay, Mary, give me vocal lessons. Okay, so sorry.
Breathe.
So I feel
like that's all you need.
Okay, I'm very passionate about this subject.
Yeah.
So basically, the point is like, if you are a Ninja Fred, and you're training all the time at your specific Ninja gym. You know how the salmon ladder feels. You know how the warp wall feels. All these things. This like home gym advantage going on. But then you go compete at a different gym, and Fred gets there, and he's like so strong in his gym. And then when he arrives at this gym, he feels like, whoa, this bar is so much heavier, or this warp wall is not how I think a warp wall should feel. And we kind of have always said like these adaptions are part of Ninja, and you need to be able to adjust, step up to the challenge, and like just do it, just send it, like this is Ninja, deal with it. And I get that perspective, like I get that mentality because I've been in Ninja now for 5 years, like I get it. But at the same time, does that make the most sense when we're looking at a sport that we're trying to make like an actual real sport where like soccer, there's not really different types of balls everywhere you go, there's not different nets everywhere you go. There's probably maybe there's some variations I don't know about. People can correct me. I'm not like I don't know everything. But like the point is that I don't think there's so much variety as there are from gym to gym.
Right.
And so part of the question was, would it make sense to build or like have any sort of standardization or regulation size blank, whether it's weights or different distances of like cradles for the salmon ladder, like weights of bars and cradles, or I don't know, like if you're using cannonballs, they can be this or this size, or like I don't know. I'm not sure what those would look like, but my thought pattern is like, if we had that, then at least training for ninjas across the board would be more equivalent in the sense of like they know what to expect. So you might not have that challenge of, oh, I've always trained here, and then when I went there, I felt like I sucked. Like maybe we could fill in the gaps in some ways, but like there's a whole slew of challenges and like problems that would come along with that. So it's a question that might solve one problem, but like create new problems.
I think like salmon ladder is a really great like example for this and why it could be successful. So there's all sorts of different salmon ladders. There's different weighted bars. There's different counterweight systems. You know, some people like to use a free bar. I personally don't. I have a scar above my eyebrow, and that is why. But anyways, you know, say we did have standard distances for the salmon ladder, right? Like it's always 1 foot, right? And that's what you can put in competition. That's one of those obstacles that like if you are training salmon ladder and you can do 1 rung at a time, like awesome. You can still do the obstacle. But it still allows those athletes that can do quads or quints to excel, right? And so it's an obstacle that works for kind of all skill levels with that sort of standardization. So that's why I would definitely be kind of in favor of those. That's my personal opinion. But, you know, I think that's where, you know, it favors the people with more skill, but it's also doable for the people who are like maybe just starting or maybe not as good, like, or aren't able to train 6 days a week, you know, that sort of thing. So.
Right, because I think right along with what you're saying, one of the opposing arguments that we heard right there in the room when people were like bringing up one idea and other people would be like, oh, well, this is my thought.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to make like a face in like a negative way. I always make faces. Okay, if you're watching on YouTube, you probably know that by now. So basically, one of the like opposing or like criticizing voices was like, hey, if we did that, it's gonna like squelter our creativity on the course. But I think to that point, like, again, right there in the room, somebody else chimed in and said, well, you know, yeah, you might have more parameters of how you can build an obstacle, but like Mary just described, there could still be creative ways of how to strategize and execute that obstacle.
Yeah.
So, yes, would it bring more structure or more, like, rules, if you want to say, to how you're building obstacles or building courses? Yes. But could you still find creative ways to execute those courses? Yes, I believe so too.
Yeah. And it actually, it totally depends on what are you standardizing, right? Like if you standardize the size of a cannonball that's used for certain age difficulties, like that doesn't at all hurt your creativity on how to use the cannonball within an obstacle. It just lets the athlete understand like, okay, when I make the reach, this is what it's going to feel like, right? And you can train more for that. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but being able to train consistently for something does give you more success. But that's another point that we're going to get to, so I will stop myself right there.
Yes. I think the last thing I wanted to say in regards to standardization, this is a little different, but it's something that has come up a lot, that Ninja really doesn't have a set curriculum or like a set accomplishment point, if you want to say, like gymnastics has leveling, or you know, there's certain expected skill sets to have at each level, which we don't really see that necessarily in our sport right now. And so if we had more of those expectations that were very clear, or skill set like levelings that were very clear, it would make it a lot easier, I think, for course designers to know how to build a course for a, you know, ages such and such, or like this preteen division or whatever. You would know what you think those athletes are really capable of. And maybe even just making divisions by a blanket age group isn't the right way either. Maybe just the way that we construct divisions isn't necessarily the best way. Because then it does leave a little bit of ambiguity as far as like, yeah, that's my age, but is that my skill? And like maybe, you know, maybe if we had also thousands of more ninja athletes, there would be ways to divide them up, maybe by age, but by, you know, these might not be the greatest words, but like beginner and advanced or whatever within the age group. You know, there could be more splits that would allow, you know, for more of those skill sets to be shown in an appropriate way.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I agree with you on that.
More questions.
Yeah. I think my experience as a coach definitely like agrees with this, because when we're getting kids ready to go to a competition, you know, you kind of get to know the gyms in your area, and you kind of get to know like what the course designers are going to throw at you, or like the general flow of a course. Like I was just talking with Taylor Johnson yesterday, and we were talking about a gym that we all love, and how because of the space, the courses can sometimes be really confusing, and like flow isn't always good because of the way that the space is set up. And so we're always like specific to train to that. Like if we have a comp coming up there, we create a confusing course. If we're going to another gym, we create a course that has a lot of swinging in it and a lot of like tight time limits and stuff like that. But again, that's like week to week, right? So like, you know, if I'm not training them for this comp at this specific gym every single week, I'm just doing it, you know, the week of. And so it's not really consistent training. It's just kind of like, all right, here's a little primer to get you ready for this. But is that going to be successful if they're not really used to doing a course with a lot of big swings in it? No, it's not. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Moving on, I think another big topic that came up, we heard a lot of this from parents, and I know we've heard this from teen girls in the past before. Shell Edge has been on the podcast talking about this. I believe you have been on the podcast talking about this. But it's the whole concept of when girls hit puberty, when boys hit puberty, bodies begin to change, and those changes in hormones and heights and like length of your levers, like your arms and your legs and things like this, all of this plays an effect of how you are performing on the course. And so, for example, pre-puberty, when we're looking at like the kids divisions and things like that, the theory has been that, okay, well, if it's before puberty, a lot of these kids are having the same training, like they're all starting really young, and they're able to perform at a somewhat equal level of skill and performance and clear courses and do really amazing things and yada yada. And I think we've seen that theory come to be true when we looked at the data this season from NNL, looking at course clears. And another thing that we kept saying we wish we could also see was not just course clears, but how many obstacles completed for both genders. So that's not something that we did have. NinjaWorks has that. Maybe they can look into that more. But help us. But so the concern comes from then if pre-puberty these kids are accomplishing what feels kind of on par, and then puberty hits and we see boys' strength excelling as testosterone kicks in and all these different things kind of play in effect. And it's not that girls' skill dissipates, but a lot of times we've heard stories from parents that as girls' bodies change, their weight changes, things fluctuate as their estrogen kicks in, they start to like grow boobs and things like that wasn't there before, and it's just changing their body type. And as those things happen, it can make you temporarily feel slower on a course. It can make you kind of struggle with what are these changes that are happening, and the way that I attacked a course before doesn't feel the same anymore. And all of these changes can lead girls to feel like, wow, well, I'm just not good at ninja anymore. Or that in comparison with seeing how the guys are doing, it's like, oh, the guys are suddenly getting these extra boosts of strength, or whatever you want to say, is like their muscles are growing, they're getting stronger at a more quicker rate than the females are. It's just that comparison alone can make you feel like, oh, well, I used to beat that guy and now he's doing so much better than me, like what's wrong with me? And so that hard comparison, like mentally and emotionally, along with the actual physical changes that are happening, has caused a lot of girls to quit ninja in the teenage years, just really feel bad about themselves and not want to come out for competition, just kind of struggle, and maybe they're pushing through it. And then there's other girls who, those changes are happening, but they're able to adapt and they're still doing really well and they're still winning competitions and yada yada. So, but I think like the concern that we've heard from some parents is that like they see where their girls are talking to them about it and they kind of don't really have a solution for them. And so the answer for some families and some ninjas just kind of feels like, you're not going to ever be able to beat those boys again. Like not just saying like you can't, you suck, or your skill's never going to be there or whatever, but it's just a reality based off of physical principles that are happening, that they are struggling now, and there's no like easy way to say like just try harder and you'll get there. Like that's not the point. We don't want to just like crush these girls by saying like just try harder period, when just trying harder might not necessarily get them there if there are these physical changes that have come to play. For some girls, working harder, they're going to see themselves excel. So it's not, again, it's not a blanket statement of it's the same for everyone. It's not. But we've heard stories of where these families are experiencing this and don't know how to handle it appropriately because, this is where their girl's at. And the last thing I'm going to say, and then Mary, you could jump in. The second part of that is that we've also heard from these same parents who their girls have now hit puberty and they are struggling, or they're just not where they feel like they should be or could be. And they're looking to the future and they say, and I don't see a lot of young adults clearing courses on the females. I don't see a lot of adults clearing courses. I don't even see a lot of elites clearing courses. So maybe Ninja just doesn't feel good anymore. And maybe I'm just never going to get better at Ninja because I don't even see the example of these other older females than me getting over this hump and doing better. And again, then the question, I'm going to speak in a circle because this is the way all the opinions go. But then the question is, well, is Ninja just about clearing courses? Is Ninja only about winning? It's not really, but is it? Like, so it's just like this roundabout conversation that keeps going. So
yeah, I think it's a really, when you hit the concept of puberty, it does become really complex, especially because we don't have data from or an example of girls who have gone through the sport, going through puberty and getting to the elite level. We don't have that yet. We're starting to see it. We have a handful of like 15-year-olds who are in the elite division. But, still we've only seen one course clear for the elite females last season. And so not including World Championships. So, the complexity kind of is introduced when you do hit puberty as the girls are, figuring out how to manage a new body, essentially. It's, I don't even know, like, unless you've seen it happen, when you get taller, when your body composition changes, doing an obstacle that you used to be able to do really successfully becomes completely different. And I saw that in a lot of kids during the pandemic, right? Like some of these kids were like super great, and then they were away from the gym for a while. They all hit growth spurts, and they were suddenly super awkward on obstacles that I'd seen them like fly through before. So, not only are these girls, they're figuring out their new bodies and trying to figure out how can I still execute these obstacles successfully now that I have all these different parts to deal with. But the courses are also getting harder because the teenage boys are continuing to excel, because the teenage boys are becoming more and more capable. And so the course designers, unfortunately, you're catering to the larger population, which is the males in that division. And so it's like a double-edged sword. It's like they're figuring out how to deal with all of these new body parts. It's new body weight. They're not building strength as fast as the boys are, and the courses are getting harder. And so where I feel like we might need more time is to say, looking to the elite division, looking to the adult female division, if these girls are continuing to train all the way up through that and getting to the elite division, are they going to figure out their bodies in a way that makes them as successful as the boys on the course? That's sort of information that I don't think we really have yet. But yeah, it's definitely a super complex issue that, it comes back to course design, I think. How do we, and again, that's success. Like, what is success? Is success getting 7 obstacles into the course? Is success just doing better than you did at the last competition? But even that, it's a weird metric. Like, how do I know that I did better than my last competition? I've had competitions where I've placed 3rd and competitions where I've placed, 5th. And I felt better about the 5th place competition because of how I did on the course, right? So yeah, it's definitely not an easy answer.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I know that there are teen girls out there who are like, I'm doing great. What are you talking about, Mary and Cara, Ninjababes? Like, I'm doing awesome out there. And yeah, I know you are. I know that there's girls that are out there crushing it.
Absolutely.
Who maybe they have felt these puberty changes that we're talking about. Maybe they felt it, but it hasn't fazed them, or it hasn't become a problem, so to speak. So again, it is completely possible to continue to train, continue to adapt, and to just shine as an athlete and continue to excel. We're not trying to say that that's not possible. I think the bigger question is, yes, as we do have plenty of girls who are going to continue to grow and advance and excel, don't forget that the guys and the boys are going to also continue to advance and excel. And so the question is, just because of morphological differences and some limitations that happen physically, not limitations that I'm just putting on you, but limitations that exist in biology, will we see that there's still a difference between how males are performing on the course and how females are performing? Is there going to just forever be a little bit of a gap? Maybe not for the most elite females. Maybe some of the most elite females are still going to be on par. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. What we're saying is that, like, we want to be able to collect more data, keep an eye out for these things, still push our females to do the absolute best that they possibly can, give them the tools they need mentally, physically, emotionally, in every way, and see them excel. We want to see females excel. But we also do not want to set up unrealistic expectations that might, for some females, become really catastrophic to their mental health and the way that they view their performance on the course.
Absolutely.
Because I spoke to Alex Katz about this a lot, and I know she'll be coming on the podcast later. There are other professionals in mental health who see a very similar trend, is that if you just say, you just need to try harder, you're just not working hard enough, that is very detrimental to someone's mental, stamina and health. If they're thinking like, well, I'm giving it the best that I can and I still can't reach this level, there must be something wrong with me. I must just not be working hard enough.
Right.
And there are times when you got to work harder, but there are times that there are these limitations in place that you just cannot change.
Yeah.
So some people might not like that answer, but I think that there's two sides of it that we really need to look at.
100% agree.
All right, moving on. So, another question that came up, which kind of touched on this briefly, but going more deeply into it, are there data points that we can be collecting that would help us make more educated decisions for the future? So maybe some sort of a big change to courses right now is not the answer, but maybe there are really key points of data that we should be collecting and paying attention to that are going to help us make educated changes in the future. So what do we mean by that? When we look at courses and we think about like struggle points, like even not talking about females for a second, just talking about heights. Came up a lot in the presentation, where if we have a lot of really tall ninjas who, when they get onto an obstacle, they have to lift up, they have to completely bend their knees and like pull in their hips and everything in order to pick up their feet from dragging on the floor. Is that changing the way that they are attacking that obstacle? Is it testing different muscles and different skill sets because of the way that really tall ninja has to try to move through this obstacle? Same for really short ninjas. If there is a starting point or even like a reach on an obstacle that you have to really, sprint and jump to, or get a really big pump on your swings in order to make those reaches, is that testing the same thing? And is that it comes back to course design, but is it testing what we want it to test on that obstacle? But kind of going back to data points, I know I'm kind of talking about two different things, but going back to data points, it's like, maybe there's things that we could be testing about the athletes themselves to then categorize them differently. Right. So going back to like our really tall athletes versus our really short athletes. Yeah. If we're testing certain things like vertical height, reach and vertical height jumps, or measures of wingspan, certain different like skill set points, would that be good data that we could take into account when we're thinking about how we could make divisions within a certain league, or even like in an adult division, like an A group, B group, I don't know. But like, what are some of these other data points that we should be looking out for?
Yeah. I think what's interesting is this kind of jumps into our next point about the sport in general, right? So when we talk about measuring vertical jump or, or max lâché, that comes down to training, right? And one of the points that we had quite a few people make in the seminars was that ninja's not really consistent, like from gym to gym, because there's not really a set training program. I think that, gyms are starting to develop curricula that, want you to have, to work on certain skills like swinging, climbing, footwork and things like that. But there's not, when you compare like ninja to like gymnastics, like in gymnastics, there is a set skill that you absolutely have to accomplish before you move up to the next level, before you're even allowed to attempt certain skills. You have to have the foundation. And so going gym to gym and measuring like vertical jump, there may be a gym that has a trainer who has a background in track. And so they're doing those sorts of exercises with their kids to increase that. They know how to train that. There's also a lot of variability in like coaches and their skill level. You might have a coach that is phenomenal at motivating their kids and absolutely fantastic at teaching ninja specific skills, but might be lacking in their actual knowledge of like physical science and sports science principles. There's a lot of variability there too. And so to measure vertical jump, I think like right now, it'd be so varied. I think it would be so varied based on the differences in training programs. So if you were to do vertical jump and put it into, a division, right? If you can do this much of a vertical jump, then if, for your height or whatever, you're in this division. I think that would probably make more sense as opposed to, age divisions. But, it does, that does segue into this next point here that, going back to girls, and going back to that piece of when are girls dropping out of sports? Historically speaking, compared to other sports, girls are dropping out in like high school, early, like late middle school, early high school, that's when they start to, step away from sports. And as girls are, and a lot of that has to do with feeling a lack of success, a lack of motivation. And in order to experience success in a lot of sports, you have certain skills that you train. You have certain things that you consistently work on that are going to make you successful in the sport. So, for example, in basketball, shooting baskets over and over again, that's going to make you more successful in the sport. Specific drills for speed and for agility, directional changes, that's going to make you successful in that sport. And those are known things that you can train. One parent brought up a point. She's like, in ninja, you have to train any number of things really aggressively. Mm-hmm. And even when you get to a competition, that might not be what panels out to success. And I think the most perfect example of this that I can give you is Caden Lebsack. Arguably one of the best ninjas on the planet right now, but he failed on a skyhook transfer, right? And that is just another skill that's in ninja, but it wasn't the skill that he had trained. He has every single tool in the toolbox, phenomenal body awareness, excellent flow, but that one skill maybe wasn't in his training bucket for the last month or something, and that's what ended up taking him out. And so right now, in order to be successful in the sport, you have to train everything. And for a girl who's venturing into high school, has less and less time to train, has less and less time to dedicate to being successful in a sport, it's really hard. It's really hard to stick with it. And especially with the differences in the courses right now, where even girls who are training a ton and a ton and a ton aren't seeing as much success. It's like a huge mountain to overcome to really want to stay in the sport and to want to continue to push yourself to be successful in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said some great things. It's making me, my brain's like gone off in 3 different directions as I'm listening to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to realize that, ninja is a very complex sport.
Yeah.
That does utilize a lot of skill sets. And we often see this play out when we talk about, like, oh, Jessica LeBrecq, she's so great at the warp wall. Oh, she's the track and field background. Oh, like, see how this goes together?
Yeah.
And it does, I do think that when you observe ninjas as a whole, especially adult ninjas who have come from a different sport previously, you can see how their background skill sets plays into what they're good at now, or maybe what their strengths were starting out, or whatever. And I think it kind of leads into another point that I wanted to make about some of our elite athletes and where they're at in their headspace. I think so many of our, I want to say this like delicately, I guess, but so many of our ninjas who have come from a gymnastics background have such a different foundation of strength than ninjas who are just starting out. This is their first sport, or came from a completely different sport that didn't necessarily help them in ninja as much as, like, say, gymnastics.
Yeah.
Or climbing, or some of these, like, pole vaulting. Some of these other sports have, like, really, really awesome skill sets that they're, like, handing over to ninja. But all that to say, kind of going back to what you're talking about, I think that when we see girls who have grown up being encouraged to, like, tackle full body strength, tackle that upper body stability and strength and explosive power, we see how that foundation of strength as a kid really lends a strong hands to ninja as an adult.
Yeah.
And so I think it's some of those ninjas who have that foundation, and it's brilliantly amazing for them now. I think it can be easy for them to forget that if you weren't set up with that kind of amazing foundational strength, you are in such a different place in ninja right now. Not for everyone. There's still ninjas who, didn't do anything and now they're crushing every single competition. But, like, I just think that foundation of strength is so important, and it's going to be so important moving forward for our younger generations. I've learned so much from the girls I know who have that gymnastics background, because I see how it's given their bodies such, like, a conditioning, a strength, like a fortitude for explosive power and all these things. And I want to see that in curriculum for these kids growing up, that they have that well-rounded explosive strength in every capacity, and that conditioning for stability and flexibility in their body is there. Because I do think that it's lacking in our sport now with like, not at every gym, because again, every gym's doing it differently, but I do think there's gyms that are just focusing on like the end result of, you need to be able to lache, so let's just work on laches. You need to be able to do this, so let's just work on that. When like, what is all of the foundation that brought these athletes to that place, being able to do it well and being able to do it for like the long term. I think a lot about injury and injury prevention. If you just jump into doing the skill and just figuring out how to do the skill, you're not really setting up your body for the most success as far as like, I'm repeating myself, but like that foundation of strength, stability, flexibility, mobility, everything it takes to be able to do that skill well for a long time. So yeah, I know that was kind of like a roundabout answer, but like I really value all of these different sports and skill sets that I see our athletes have brought to the table, but it's just not the same for everyone. Like we said, like we do have such a varied background of experience in sports when it comes to like, what did you do before Ninja, or what brought you to Ninja? And so, yeah, I think that even when we look at this topic of should we do something different with the courses or not, I think people who've had a background that has set them up for success in Ninja look at it differently than those who don't have a background that set you up for as much success. Because I think we're at different places in our performance capabilities.
Very true.
Yeah, there's so many thoughts in my head, Mary. So I guess the last thing, I could have just added this on right there, but speaking again about elite ninjas, I do think that a lot of ninjas who are in elite they've told me, they feel like, I chose elite, that's where I want to be. I want it to be hard. I chose elite because it was going to be hard. It's going to be the most challenging thing I could possibly do, and that's where I want to be. I don't want anyone to take away from that challenge or make it easier for me, quote unquote. I want it to just be the most elite it could possibly be. And so I think for some ninjas in those divisions, any sort of accommodation or change feels a little insulting, or just feels like, why? Like, what is the point if I'm in elite? Why? If I wanted that, I would go be an adult, because their courses are easier, quote unquote. So
they are. It's, I'm in the adult division. They're easier.
They are easier. I guess, yes, they are easier.
I think what I would say to that, and this is kind of venturing more so into, my personal thoughts on the topic, right, is that, this discussion isn't really happening to cater to any one specific group within Ninja, right? It's catering to the sport itself and how the sport impacts females who are involved in it. The reason this discussion is so important is because ultimately it boils down to, at least the way I see it, it ultimately boils down to keeping girls in the sport, right? And girls continuing to feel empowered, and girls continuing to want to be involved in Ninja, right? I bet from elite all the way down to like the newest ninja in the kids division, you can ask any of these girls, like, did you feel really confident when you accomplished that obstacle? Did something happen in Ninja this last week that made you feel good about yourself, that made you feel empowered? Did you learn something from your coach? Did you learn something from one of your other competitors or one of your teammates, right? Ninja as a whole, we're talking about it in a very competitive sense and how to make it a better competitive sport, but kind of the overarching reality is that Ninja is hugely beneficial to build a girl's confidence, everyone's confidence, but specifically we're talking about like the female athlete population here. I could quote a million different studies that tell you that girls who are involved in sports and have a higher sense of self-esteem tend to succeed more later on in life. And so it's about setting up girls for success. It's about utilizing Ninja for the phenomenal tool it is, and wanting to have more girls involved in the sport and wanting to stay in the sport. And I think that's the overarching piece of it, right? And, we have to consider the elite athletes because they are girls just like everybody else who are like in a more amateur division. But I think if we kind of keep that concept in mind that, it's not just about what do I want this to look like at the Olympics, right? It's about what do we want this sport to look like so that it is a welcoming place that girls are going to want to stick with, that they're going to want to continue to be involved in and learn these lessons. I'm going to stop myself because I could go on and say this over a million times because I'm very passionate about it. But I think that's the kind of the bigger picture that we need to consider when we're having these discussions is, ultimately why is the discussion happening in the first place? So.
Well said. I agree. Very well said. It is about the sport as a whole, and I think that's where, going back just briefly, because I know we've already made this a really long episode, but that's why we got involved with this discussion in the first place. You and I had very strong opinions about not changing anything, going back close to 2 years ago now when we started this discussion. And it wasn't until we kind of put aside, like, the emotions of what we were feeling about it and realized what other girls who were younger than us, what they were feeling, and then kind of taking a step back, looking at the sport as a whole, that we began to think, like, all right, let's really hear out all these different opinions, because we realized it's not just about us, it's not just about how it makes me feel, it's about the sport as a whole and how we are developing and how it's going to impact future generations. So there's a lot to be said, and again, like, I know that you and I are coming at this really wanting to get the conversation going, and we have, and really just allow all of this we talked about in a way that's not just like, no, we can't change, so we shouldn't talk about it. Like, no, let's just hear it out. Let's just consider what changes could be made or couldn't be made or shouldn't be made or should, and just allow this to be a sport that is going to bring the most success to females, because I think that we want to celebrate what our amazing, strong women and girls have been doing and what they're going to continue to do. And we want to celebrate that in the best way possible. So there will be more episodes coming soon about what possibly are changes that the NNL is going to propose or not make. I'm not sure yet. We're still waiting to hear like what those changes will be, but as soon as we know, we will definitely come on here and talk more about it. And we're excited, looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mary, for coming on and gracing us with your presence.
Anytime.
There was no bonus content today, but if you want to support all this research and everything that we've been doing within Ninja, you can support the Ninjababes podcast on patreon.com/Ninjababes. And there you will find a bunch of different tiers of how you could donate and support every month, with some free gifts and like great bonus content. You can hear bonus portions of the episodes, get free merch quarterly throughout the year.
Merch.
There's merch, and even be part of calls and things that happen monthly that kind of discuss like the future of where the podcast is going. So if you'd like to be a part of any of that, head on over to patreon.com/Ninjababes. All right, thanks for listening.
All my Ninja Babes out there, be strong, be you, be a Ninja Babe.
Amazing.
Yay.
Yes. I'm so happy for our community. I really am. And I can't wait to see how this sport grows. Be strong, be you, be a Ninja Babe.
Boom.
Oh! Okay.